Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christopher Williams. I am the STEM Education Specialist at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I work with K-12 educators, students, and the public to tell the stories of African Americans and the impacts they've made on American culture through science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And today I will talk with you about the museum's collaboration with NHGRI and how we work together to create new educational content related to an underappreciated figure in American history, Henrietta Lacks. As the STEM educator at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, I work to make our museum a global leader and resource for K-12 STEM education content, to enhance teaching and learning of educators and students, and to lead our visitors to recognize the challenges, resilience, and victories of African Americans in STEM, both past and present. Our feature program is the STEM Master Teacher Fellowship, where we invite in-service STEM educators with at least 5 years of teaching experience to work alongside education staff on site for the summer. And if you look at the first image, you will see our first two STEM educators. They are Francis and Allison, and they're standing with the current Secretary of the Smithsonian and former Director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, Lonnie Bunch. So the STEM Teacher Fellows, they work with us to create new STEM content that we share in the form of teacher professional development workshops, small museum-based programs called pop-up programs, and then larger museum-wide programs called STEM Days. So STEM Days are special days at the museum where we give our visitors access to hands-on activities and allow them to engage with exhibiting organizations who do work in the areas related to the theme of the day. Our first STEM Day explored the different roles that African Americans play at NASA, ranging from scientists to engineers, administrators, and even astronauts. Whereas our second STEM Day, which happened in February of this year, focused on the long history of African Americans in engineering. And during these STEM days, we bring in accomplished STEM workers to inform and inspire our audience using presentations. And so far, we have had astronaut Alvin Drew, NASA engineer Dr. April Erickson, and world-renowned engineer and inventor Dr. Lonnie Johnson speak with our audiences. So the teachers and the audiences who participate in our programs leave with new knowledge of African Americans in STEM, as well as their cultural impacts and the cultural impacts for the contributions they provided. Now, the partnership between NHGRI and the National Museum of African American History and Culture began 7 years ago with the program looking at the African diaspora. And a year later, an additional program exploring the life of Henrietta Lacks was held. Then in 2017, during an educator workshop, the meeting organizers asked participants to create several lesson plans with the focus on the story of Henrietta Lacks. And over the following year, several educators developed 3 lesson plans and presented them at the 2018 NHGRI short course in Genomics that is held on the NIH's campus each year. Now, the created lessons provide a glimpse into the abuse and unethical treatment of African Americans at the hands of white medical doctors. And each of the lessons is a standalone, but together they provide an insightful history of the suffering that African Americans have faced at the hands of doctors. The story of Henrietta Lacks, while the focus, leads nicely into the stories of enslaved women Lucy, Betsy, and Anarcha, who were used in horrific experimental surgeries without the aid of anesthesia for the purpose of studying the female reproductive tract. Their names and suffering have been lost to history, although the doctor that led these experiments, James Marion Sims, went on to become known as the father of modern gynecology. Now, other stories that are addressed in these lessons are those of the Alabama men who participated in the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. The US government-led study allowed their patients' syphilis infections to progress beyond the necessary boundaries, even though penicillin was discovered as an effective treatment during the course of the study. They were promised treatment, but all they received were placebos and ineffective medication. As a result, many of the men died from syphilis or their complications, and some of them, unfortunately, even passed it on to their wives and unborn children. Now, all of these stories and more can be found within the 3 lesson plans that were created. Now, the 3 lessons that created are cervical cancer in the HPV perspective, racism in medicine and healthcare, and the complicated legacy of Henrietta Lacks. And each is designed to take between 2 to 3 hours, and each lesson is preceded by a foreword written by the granddaughter of Henrietta Lacks, Jerry Lacks Y. Now, the cervical cancer and HPV perspective lesson includes videos and activities on the biology of cancerous cells and HeLa cells, and touches on cervical cancer vaccines and treatment. The racism in medicine and healthcare lesson shares historical accounts of medical racism against African Americans and investigates African American health in the past while highlighting the participation of African Americans in medical fields as caretakers for their communities. The last lesson, Segregation and the Complicated Legacy of Henrietta Lacks, addresses important topics surrounding Henrietta Lacks' life, such as the Great Migration, along with segregation in the US, and lastly, medical ethics. The topics investigated in lesson plans are still relevant today, especially those areas related to medical racism and ethics as more people search out their ancestry using companies such as Ancestry and 23andMe. Now, we wanted to ensure that all teachers and educators who were interested in these topics were able to access the information, even if they weren't able to participate in a short course. So what we're doing is we're creating digital versions of the lessons in the Smithsonian Learning Lab. Now, the Smithsonian Learning Lab is a free one-stop shop for lessons and activities from many of the Smithsonian museums. Anyone can join the Smithsonian Learning Lab and gain access to the free content that is made from different SI museums as well as educators. And once you're in, you're able to create new activities and modify existing ones. The Learning Lab is an exciting and powerful tool because it allows users to combine multiple media types to create unique and engaging activities. Now, making these lessons available digitally allows the contents to reach students and communities that do not have access to the short course or to the museum. You can visit the Learning Lab at learninglab.si.edu. And the first lesson plan that we're digitizing is Segregation and the Complicated Legacy of Henrietta Lacks. By transporting this lesson into the Learning Lab, we are able to include the museum's collections and bring them into view. The images from the museum are weaved into the lessons in a visually appealing way that strengthen the argument around Henrietta Lacks and her importance in American culture and in the laboratory. As teachers and students work through the activities, they are examining the objects that were used to enforce the racist thoughts, ideologies, and practices that were present throughout much of the 1900s. The teachers and students who take part in these lessons will understand that the story of Henrietta Lacks, while being an extraordinary one, is still more common than expected, and also one that occurred because of the racial undertones of the American society in the first half of the 1900s. The inclusion of the museum's collections provides a view of American history that teachers and students would not get without visiting the museum. Now, access to this information in these lessons should not just be limited to people in the classroom. So NHGRI and the museum have decided to share some of this information in 2 museum-based programs that will take place later in the fall of this year. The first program will be one of the pop-up programs that I mentioned earlier. And in this program, we will discuss Henrietta Lacks, cell biology, race, and the history of medical racism. This program will be targeted towards K-12 audiences and will include hands-on STEM activities where visitors can explore the structure of DNA, chromosomes, and genes. Visitors will also be able to make connections to relevant topics on display in the museum, such as the exhibition on Dr. Montague Cobb, a physical anthropologist of the 1900s who worked to disprove the genetics and biology of racism. Now, because the program encourages the participation and engagement of students, as well as their teachers and guardians, there are multiple opportunities for intergenerational learning to occur during these days that don't often happen during the school day. And the second program is an evening program on race and genetics that is tailored towards scientists, educators, and health professionals. The goal of the program is to inform the audience about advancements in DNA research and their implications for race relations. Attendees will learn about the completion of the Human Genome Project, as well as recognizing the limitations of genetic research. And lastly, our program participants will comprehend how genomic analysis relates to current affairs such as population health, criminal investigation, and reparations. These programs will enable us to effectively engage with and support our visitors from a wide range of ages, interests, and educational levels. To date, our partnership with NHGRI has enabled us to create more educational content for the classroom. This new STEM content is paired with civic discussions of what it means to be an American citizen and also a human. Teachers and students who engage with these lessons will be changed from their participation. We want to share information that challenges the thoughts and beliefs of our audience and makes them think not just about the past, but also about the present and future of our country, as well as the relationships with one another. Now, Henrietta Lacks was a woman whose name we all should remember, not just because her cells have been used to develop vaccines for polio or to study microbes such as salmonella, HPV, and HIV. She is worth remembering because she was an African-American woman whose story is more common than we would like to believe. Henrietta, a wife and a mother, moved with her family from Virginia to Baltimore, looking for better opportunities. And only 4 months after giving birth to her 5th child, she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. And just a mere 8 months later, at the age of 31, Henrietta died from her cervical cancer. And at the time of her death, her name was unknown beyond her immediate friends, family, and community. But now, almost 70 years later, her name has circumnavigated the globe, and her story is difficult to forget. Now, as we bring genetics and genomics to the classrooms of students across the nation, we are also spreading the important and timeless story of Henrietta Lacks. Her story is American history told through the African-American lens. So we want to say thank you for your participation and your attention, and we'd like to take any questions that you may have.